Reach out, touch faith. Jesus, someone to hear your prayers, someone who cares. Your own personal Jesus, someone to hear your prayers, someone who's there. And bone by the telephone. Lift up the receiver, I'll make you a believer. Take second best, put me to the test. Things on your chest you need to confess. I will deliver, you know I'm a forgiver. Reach out, touch faith. Reach out, touch faith. Your own personal Jesus. Someone to hear your prayers, someone who cares. Your own personal Jesus. Someone to hear your prayers, someone who cares. Feeling unknown and you're all alone. Flesh and bone on the telephone. Lift up the receiver, I'll make you a believer. I will deliver, you know I'm a forgiver. Reach out, touch faith. Personal Jesus. Reach out, touch faith. Reach out, touch faith. Reach out, touch faith.
Great job, band. So we are starting a new series today called Explaining Jesus and Experiencing Christ. So nothing like personal Jesus to kick us off this Sunday morning. Go ahead, stand up on your feet because we're going to get started in worship in a second. So go ahead, stretch it out, wave your bodies up, nice and early. But I just want to offer a very quick welcome to everyone here in the room, watching online, or in our atrium. Welcome to Crossroads. If you are a first-time guest, one of our Crossroads core values is inclusion. So we want you to know whether you are welcome here no matter your race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, or socioeconomic status. We believe all people are loved by God equally, and we try to follow that in everything that we do here at Crossroads. I am Emily. I am our student director, so typically I'm out in the student center, and I also work with our day camps as our assistant director. So I love working with your kids. So welcome middle school, high school students, and elementary students. If you're here, we do have programs going on right now, so you can head out to those if you would like to. Right now, the student gathering is happening, so in the student center. So if you are middle school and high school students, when we are done here with worship, I'd love to meet you in the atrium and walk out with you because I know it can be a little bit scary to do that for the first time on your own. So here is what you can expect this morning. We will have more music here in a minute. And as I already mentioned, we are starting the new teaching series, Explaining Jesus and Experiencing Christ. And we will be exploring how the understanding of the historical Jesus can shape our faith, actions, and experiencing him today. But we are going to enter into a time of prayer. We will have prayer hosts on either side of the room Mary and Shelley. So if you need prayer, feel free to step over there, and they would love to pray with you and to be there to support you. If you're joining us remotely, the easiest way to request prayer is through the Crossroads app. You can also text the word prayer to 970-500-0970. And on our online campus, you can click the live prayer button. So let's continue with worship and prayer.
You're the horizon, burn bright, glimmer that breaks the constant light. You are the brilliance, victory, the evidence of things unseen. Even the darkest days are temporary. You are the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You are the everlasting light. Sing this with us. You are the glory that stays. You never dim, you never fade. You're the power, the truth. Nothing can stop you. Nothing can stop you. Even the darkest days are temporary. You are the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You are the everlasting light. Even the darkest days are temporary. You are the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You are the everlasting light. The end and the beginning, the new reality. Outside my understanding, but still within my reach. As far as I can see you, you're closer still to me. You are the everlasting light. The end and the beginning, new reality. Outside my understanding, still within my reach. As far as I can see you, closer still to me. You are the everlasting light. You can go ahead and have a seat. We are in this season that we call Lent. And Lent is the about 40 days or so, 6 Sundays leading up to Easter. It starts with Ash Wednesday, goes through Easter. And this Lenten season, as a church, we are focusing on like the 3 pillars of Lent. I hate pillars. It sounds so... But really, it's just about prayer, and it's about fasting, and it's about generosity. And so through generosity, we're focusing on our peace is worth it ministry emphasis. With fasting, we're encouraging everyone to get creative. How are you making space in your life for God to show up in new ways? And when we're talking about prayer, we simply think of that as mindfulness. And so as a church, we are walking through, the invitation is open for you to join us and walk through this book by Sister Wendy Beckett, and it's called The Art of Lent, a painting a day from Ash Wednesday through Easter. And it's a new experience for us. We're taking a look every day. We're viewing a painting, and some of it's modern art, some of it is ancient, and everything in between. Sister Wendy has written a contemplation that follows each painting, bringing in these themes of Lent. And then going along with each of these days, one of our Crossroads members, peacemakers, staff people sitting in the seats next to you, they're writing reflections to go along with Sister Wendy's painting and her meditation. And so it's a really unique experience. We're about a week and a half into it. It is not too late to jump in. You can jump in at any time. If you want to join us for this journey of Lent, you can check the box on your Connect card. You can also find it in the Crossroads app in the peacemaking section, and we're just updating that every day as we go through Lent. This week, our theme that Sister Wendy is inviting us to focus on is the theme of contemplation. And so on this, every Sunday, what we're doing is we're kind of walking through one of these paintings, viewing the painting, and listening to Sister Wendy's words. And so right now, take a breath. We're going to sit and we're going to view a painting, and it might be uncomfortable, and that is okay. But I invite you to sit in this moment and then listen to Sister Wendy's words as we continue in our service together.
In a crystal vase, bathed in sunlight, Manet's white lilac has no function except to exist. In the last year of his life, wretchedly shortened through illness, Manet painted several of these vases of simple flowers. Their singleness of being must have moved him and perhaps consoled him amid the anxieties and anguishes of his own pain-filled days. Contemplation has something of this function, a simplifying, a beautifying. It reminds us that we have only to be still and let the waters of grace refresh us and the sunlight of peace shine upon us.
Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. The hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrows forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and fears are past, all safe and blessed, we shall meet at last. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul.
Father, sometimes we are just so afraid of stillness and quiet. One of our writers, Lord, reminded us this past week that silence is a muscle, and sometimes it's hard to grow that muscle. But silence allows us to be honest and real with ourselves and with the reality of what we're feeling, even when our culture, our religion, our friends are uncomfortable with what we're feeling, what we're experiencing. Silence can be a great friend to us in those moments. So as we continue this journey, a journey that leads us to a space of joy but walks through a space of grief, may our hearts be big enough to handle all of it, Lord. And today, God, those that are sitting in this space, heavy with grief, may they grasp a hold of that image of that flower just sitting in water, doing nothing but just receiving nourishment. And may we do the same. May we learn to live this peacemaking life, this contemplative life, a life that can simply flow with the Spirit. I'm grateful to be together today. Open our eyes and open our ears, that we would experience something beyond what we could ever understand, but that we'd know is true. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. It's good to see everybody today. Thanks for being here. I would love to say it's good to be back, but it was a lot warmer where I was. But it is good to be back with you all. So hey, take a moment, turn around, wave at somebody, see if there's anybody around you you've never seen before. And if so, just look them up and down, see if they belong here. And remind yourself of our value of inclusion, that yes, even they are fully embraced and affirmed here. Hey, do me a favor, turn your attention to the screen, check this out.
For 2,000 years, people all over the world have celebrated the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, a Jewish peasant who proclaimed a path to peace on earth, a path of light, contrary to the conventional wisdom of our world. Yet, the darkness of violence, oppression, and war still persists. But the darkness cannot extinguish the light. Today, many choose to walk the path of peace illuminated by Jesus, an extraordinary path that leads to a peace that is more than just a lack of violence,
Rather, this path of peace is marked with the work of grace, justice, inclusion, and mercy that creates wholeness and belonging and brings joy to the world. At Crossroads Church, we have begun the work of our 10-year vision, confronting and rewriting 5 unacceptable truths that destroy peace on earth. Seeing spiritual emptiness become spiritual vitality, poverty becoming physical and financial flourishing, working to replace illiteracy with education and opportunity, erasing fear of the other such as racism, homophobia, and sexism through inclusion and affirmation, and bringing freedom to those trapped in modern-day slavery. This is the path to peace on earth that Jesus illuminated, and this path is worth it. In 2023, Crossroads will continue to courageously walk this peacemaking path of Jesus.
I want to just give you a little update as we kind of head into the Lent season. As Kia mentioned, there's kind of 3 foundational parts of the Lent season, and that is what? Do you remember what she said? Prayer, fasting, and everybody's favorite? Generosity, right? The real traditional religious word is almsgiving. Do you know that every great religion, every major religion in the world has a part of its tradition, these 3 things, right? That there's this attitude that we bring to the world of contemplative, meditative. We call it mindfulness here. That's one of our rules of life in the peacemaking way that we finished up last week. Give it up for Jimmy Scruggs again. Did a great job. And so a Peace is Worth It is kind of this emphasis that we introduce at Christmas time. We launch with some energy and excitement, and then we kind of pick it back up and really focus in on it because it's a way that we can actually live into these 3 pillars, as Kia said, in this season of Lent. So we can be mindful, contemplative, prayerful about what's happening regarding peacemaking in our church and in the world. We can be really thoughtful in terms of our generosity. We can give to the peacemaking fund that we have, the Peace is Worth It fund every year. And then we also can figure out how in our lives, what could we give up fasting, what could we set aside for these 40 days, not to make God do what we want God to do. Wouldn't that be awesome if that's how it worked? Just give up chocolate and then you win the lottery? That would be amazing, right? But fasting really is a spiritual discipline that is about changing us, not changing the universe or God, but it's about setting something aside so that we can focus our spiritual life, so that we can be more attentive into a peacemaking arena. So you could fast something, and rather than what you might do during that time, you could grow in one of the 5 unacceptable truths that we talk about here, whatever it might be. And all that's available in the Crossroads app. This is really just another advertisement for the Crossroads app. No, it's not. I'm just kidding. So listen, if you haven't yet received one of these, this is our Peace is Worth It brochure for 2023. I would encourage you to grab one on your way out. But I just want to share with you some highlights, some things that are happening where we are in this, and just encourage us all to participate with our whole heart. So we talk about time, talent, and treasure. We talk about new things that are taking place. One of the things that we talk about is new financial freedom in our church, a freedom from debt on our building. Yeah, let's just speak that into existence. I'm going to become a Word of Faith church with that one. I'm going to speak it into existence, right? No, but we're excited to be partnering with the Loveland Housing Authority with the portion of our property that's unused, really for affordable housing in our community. And so that grant proposal has been put in. It was put in at the end of December, and now we're just waiting to hear. And Loveland Housing Authority hasn't heard anything, which is actually a good thing, because a lot of people have heard no. So we found out that a lot of folks that have applied, that put in their grant application, but we know that a lot of the partnerships that we have with the Loveland Housing Authority in this project, Habitat for Humanity, Impact Development Fund, Mission Homes, these partnerships really present this project to the state as a wonderful resource for our community. So we're excited. We can be praying about that, being mindful of it. So that's wonderful. We're working on new curriculum and new ways of thinking about how do we help people grow in this life of Jesus. So some of the series that we're doing this year are really meant to transform kind of the underbelly of our church? I don't know. That's just what came to my mind. It was a good image. But we just finished up this Way of Peace. And that wasn't a series for one time. That's 7 peacemaking rules that we put into our lives, and we're actually organizing resources around those 7 rules. It's going to become an integral part of our app, of our daily way of living as peacemakers in our everyday normal life. So we're excited about that. Now, we have a goal coming up here that you can participate in. On Easter, we're launching a series called Fresh Perspective, where we're evaluating and giving a fresh perspective on things like, what is the Bible? On things like, what does it mean to talk about sin? And just what does it look like if you maybe came from a tradition, or maybe you've been hurt and maybe you need to rethink through the language around church. So we're going to be looking at some key topics, and we're going to offer people the opportunity to get together and discuss these fresh perspectives in groups, whether they be on Zoom or in somebody's home or here in the building at the facility. And so we're hoping to have 15 new fresh perspective groups get started. And so you might want to participate in one of those. That could be a way in which you could grow in your wisdom, right? That's one of our values. And we talk about giving our talents. Everybody just raise your hand up nice and high like this. Pretend like you have a bell in your hand and just ring it. It's a silent bell. It's kind of like a silent disco, you know. So we rang the bell with the Salvation Army as part of our Pieces Worth It campaign. And in case you didn't catch the follow-up on that, we had 170 hours given to that project through our church, which is awesome. Overall, in our community, we raised about $121,000 alongside of the Salvation Army, and we raised $15,000 of that. 10%. We did 10% of that for all of it. That's awesome. And when you take out our 75% that we keep here, no, we didn't. I'm just kidding. We don't keep anything. I was just a joke. All right, so there you go. So there's a talent. And then we talk about our Pieces Worth It giving. We give to the Pieces Worth It. We emphasize that giving between Christmas and Easter. And our goal this year for that is $150,000. And you can see how that all is being used. And we're at like 87,000, 86,000. I wrote it down here. I should just say what it is. It's 86. We're at $86,000 so far, which is awesome. So thank you to those of you who are giving. I know we give every month towards that. We spread it out throughout the year. That's just kind of what we do. But we emphasize it. Our family, that's what our family does. But a lot of you have given in December. A lot of you are giving right now. Some of you are like, how do I give? I can see you're frothing at the mouth. How do I become a more generous person? Show me the way, Ryan. So that's what we're doing. So I want to encourage you during this Lent season, participate in the Lenten journey. Really live into that mindfulness, that spirit of mindfulness, spirit of generosity. Give up something during this season. Do it so that we can all grow, right? Not to make God do something for us. It doesn't work that way. But so that we might become more mindful, aware peacemakers on the planet. How many of y'all believe we could use a few more of those? Right? I know I do. All right. Well, hey, do me a favor. Give a great big hand, maybe even a standing ovation for Emily Pierce as she comes up and helps us understand all that's happening here at the Crossroads Network. Thank you very much. My apologies.
Thank you. No. Awesome, Fred. So a couple of more announcements. So does everyone have their program? If you do, put it in the air. Do you have your program? If not, raise your hand and a host will bring you a program. You want to make sure you have these because it is a great weekly resource to let you know what is happening in the Crossroads Network. It also just has stuff about our adventure camps. So if you have a kid who's like 5 to 11, come hang out at camp with me this summer. It's going to be fun. And also inside your program is a Connect card. So this is for everybody. So if you're a regular attender, you know the drill. Let's get it filled out. We're going to drop it in the box on the way out. If you're new here, please fill this out so we can connect with you outside of Sunday mornings. That is one of my favorite things about Crossroads is we have a really, really great community here of friends and who are more like family. So fill this out. We'd love to connect with you, even if you're a guest who's just visiting. And also inside your program is a giving envelope. Generosity keeps coming. Make sure this is one way to give. There are also other ways as well. So there you go. So hang on to your Connect card in your giving envelope, and on your way out of service day, you'll drop it in the boxes at the end of the service. And you can find all of this in our Crossroads app. The app keeps coming. So let's check out this video about the app really quick.
The Crossroads Colorado app is your new communications hub where members and regular attenders connect with everything going on around the Crossroads network. Find weekend resources like the Connect card, digital talk notes, services on demand, and podcasts. Connect with groups and request prayer. Find details and registration info for upcoming events. Engage with the work of peacemaking in your everyday normal life and follow along with spiritual growth journeys. Manage your serving schedule, make a donation, and more. To download the app, search Crossroads Colorado in the App Store or Google Play, or text Crossroads CO app to 833-270-1344 and get started today.
Sweet. So if you haven't already, please download the app. I actually love it. At first, whenever Kia talked about it, I was like, we're really going to add an app to like our workflow. But no, it's actually been a really, really great resource. You get push notifications for the Lent series. And again, serving opportunities to remind me to be here at 8:30 this morning as not being a morning person. So please make sure you download the app. It is super awesome. And so in the app, you can also find details about our Easter service, because Easter is coming up on April 9th. We will be having 2 services, one at 9 and then one at 10:30. And make sure to invite friends, because we're going to have an Easter party for kids. It's just a great time to connect. And yeah, for those who sometimes may feel a little bit alone on the holidays, invite them into our space with us to feel loved and celebrated all together. And so I am about to head back out to the Student Center. So if you are a middle school or high school student and you have never checked out the student gathering before, meet me in the atrium. I know it can be really scary walking out there by yourself for the first time into any space. And we have a lot of amazing students out there that I've known for over 5 years now, and they're the most loving, caring, kind people I've ever met, and always encourage me to be a better human every single day. And also, if you're an elementary school student, you can head up and hang out with Miss Amy upstairs, so I know she would love to see you all. And then also, after service today for middle school and high school students, we are doing a student adventure. We do these monthly. This month, we are doing a stay venture here on the property. We're just going to watch a movie, have some sandwiches from Jimmy John's, chill, hang out. And then next month, we will be headed to Fort Fun. So if this is something you're interested in, come find me after service. We'd love to have you join. It is never too late. But yes, so thank you guys and enjoy service.
Right. That is so intense music. I was like chill, and then that music started playing. I got stressed out immediately. It's like, what happens if this message is awful? Guess it won't be any different than any other week I'm here, right? So, listen, if you're a guest today, thanks for being here. My name is Ryan. If you're tuning in online for the first time, you can always switch over. There's lots of other online churches if you get bored. So, totally understand and appreciate that. You've heard all the important stuff as it stands. But if you are a guest, thank you for being here today. Inside the program is my cell phone number, whether you're tuning in online or here in the room. Feel free to shoot me a text. I'd love to have coffee, meet you. If you've been around for a while, happy to meet with you as well. If we've never had coffee especially, love to hear your story, share a little bit of my crazy journey that brought us here into northern Colorado, and it is good to be here. Listen, I grew up in the Midwest and lived in Missouri, but then our family lived in New England for about 20 years in Massachusetts and Maine, and then we moved out here to northern Colorado. But where I kind of grew up, what feels the most like home was Indianapolis, kind of where I spent junior high and high school. But I remember a lot about some time we spent in Ohio. Grew up there in Ohio, in Cleveland. Yes, a beautiful town, as you can tell. You say Cleveland, you get a few woo, you know. If I say San Francisco, everybody's like, yeah, San Francisco. We had water in Cleveland. It was amazing. Don't knock the Great Lakes, people. Do not knock the Great Lakes. So grew up there and kind of grew up in a middle-class family. My father was on staff at a church. Church is kind of in my bones, in my blood, so to speak. Really, I just can't do anything else. I have no other discernible skills, which is why you're stuck with me. If I had any other skills, I would do them, but this is it. You're welcome, right? So, but I remember growing up in Ohio, we didn't go out to eat a whole lot. We didn't have a whole lot of extra income, especially in those days. I'm grateful that I think church world and nonprofit world does a better job of paying people than they did maybe 40 or 50 years ago. But, we just didn't have a whole lot of extra money. But every now and then on Sunday nights after church, because we did Sunday night church back then. Any Sunday night church folks? Come on. Yeah, that's good stuff, right? So sometimes we'd go out to dinner with a group of people, which was really fun to have fellowship. That's what we called it back then. And we still call it that today, by the way. And we would go to this place called Friendly's. Y'all ever heard of Friendly's? Anybody heard of Friendly's? Amazing place, right? Amazing place. Loved going to Friendly's. Chicken fingers, out of this world. Out of this world. So whenever we would get to go out and my parents would say, we're going to Friendly's, I would freak out. Super excited. Imagine 8-year-old Ryan all this craziness just exuding out at the idea of Friendlies, because Friendlies came with a free sundae, right? Friendlies came with a free sundae at the end of the meal. Chicken fingers, French fries, and a sundae. What more could you want as a white, middle-class American kid, right? With one sister, one dog, and a split-rail fence. We had it all, right? Now, we would do that. Then we moved to Indianapolis. There's no Friendlies there. So Friendlies just kind of left my mind, right? So now, fast forward, I live in Missouri for a little bit for undergraduate work, travel out to New England for graduate school, married, get to New England, and lo and behold, what do they have? Friendlies, right? So I tell Wendy, I said, have you ever been to Friendlies? Wendy's my wife. And she's like, no. I said, we got to go to Friendlies. It's amazing. Amazing. It's going to blow your mind. What are you talking about? It's phenomenal. We're going to Friendlies. Let's go to Friendlies. Now, at that point, we had no money whatsoever. In graduate school, both working, barely making by, in-laws paying for the groceries. But I was like, we are going to Friendlies. I don't care if we have to ditch on the bill. We're going to Friendlies. All right? So we save up for about 8 months because I don't know if you know Friendlies 4-star, right? 3 diamonds, whatever it is. So we go in, sit down, open up the menu, just like I remember. It's a beautiful big menu, laminated, the whole deal, colorful. There's the free sundae. Order the chicken fingers, get the fries. They bring it out. It's the most disgusting food I've ever had in my life. Horrible. And I imagine no. They have changed the recipe. How many of y'all know they did not change the recipe? My memory of Friendlies was what? Very different than my reality of Friendlies. Now, Friendlies was Friendlies. It was what it was. When you're 7 years old and they bring you ice cream with chocolate syrup on it or caramel and a chocolate and some of those little walnuts that are crushed up that have probably been sitting back there for 8 years, who knows? And it's not even real ice cream, right? It's not. It was powder at one point in time, and then it goes into some magic machine that mixes some form of dairy product with it, I don't know, and then out comes something we call ice cream, but it wasn't real ice cream. But what I realized, it was disgusting. Let's close in prayer. That's the message. It has nothing to do with it has everything to do with what I'm talking about today. Because here's the deal, right? We remember things different than their reality, right? Now, I could have gone to Friendlies and I could have been very uncritical of it. I could have sat there and blindly believed that this was a delicious, fantastic meal. Because that's what my younger self told me. That's what my soul told me. That's what the innermost part of me told me. This is a wonderful place. And I could have sat there and I could have actually done the opposite. I could have had my whole childhood destroyed. If this is a lie, what else is a lie? Was I even loved? Did we even have a dog? Was that a dog? What other trickery were my parents doing to me as a child growing up? Are they even my parents? Who am I? I could have had a total existential meltdown at Friendlies right there in that moment. Because memory is powerful, but memory changes and shifts and shape. And in that moment, I could respond to Friendlies in a faith-filled way. No, it's really good. And I could just have powered through the 3 chicken fingers that they brought me, which would have been a mistake. And then I could have gone and told everybody about how amazing Friendlies was. And then they'd go to Friendlies, they'd be like, I am never, ever taking another restaurant recommendation from Ryan. Or I could have gone the opposite. I could have just been like, this place is terrible. I can't believe it. And I could tell people, never go to Friendlies. It's a scam. It's not even real chicken. Or I could find some happy place. And I could hold this space that says, Friendlies is what it is. It's really not great food. It's really not. It's not great ice cream. It's not Ben & Jerry's, I'm not getting any Tonight Dough there. But it's something really powerful in my life. It's something that was formative, that shaped me, that in that experience was love. In that experience was generosity. In that experience was sacrifice, knowing that for us to go out to dinner was a big deal. Right? So I can hold that tension between these two realities. And that's kind of a picture of what I think a real healthy spirituality is like. Not me, but that idea of holding these two ideas of, say, faith and reason in tension. The faith that says, Friendlies is more than just ice cream and bad chicken fingers. Friendlies is a space of love. for me. Friendly's was a space of wonderful memories. It was a space of laughter. And so there's something important. But I can also hold Reason that's like, I don't go to Friendly's for the food. I go there for something else. And what I've realized is in my own life, oddly enough, I hold these two values really close together. They're kind of like two sides of the same very important value coin in my life, and that is faith and reason. Right? Faith and reason, that somehow these two don't have to be in opposition. And I was kind of raised in a tradition that didn't mean to, but certainly gave me the impression that they were in opposition, that it was about faith. That when your reality didn't match up with your faith, you had to dismiss reality. And somewhere along the way, I thought, well, I'm not going to tell you what I thought because it's a curse word, but I thought to myself, that's crazy. That's crazy. This doesn't make any sense. I'm supposed to reject reality for this experience that doesn't make any sense in my life. And my Friendly's kind of analogy sticks with me because I could like approach Friendly's like that with the reason of like, oh, it's just terrible. Or I could approach it with faith. So reason is this idea that I can actually come to life, come to circumstances, and use the power of my mind to think. And I can actually understand, I can form judgments through a process of logic. That's reason. So I can come to Friendly's and be like, okay, let's think about this. But I can also come to Friendly's from a place of faith, right? Faith that tells me like there's something bigger and spiritual about that experience. As odd as it sounds, Friendly's was like a church to me. Right? If church is a space where we experience something beyond what we can see, hopefully beyond what we can taste. Some of you will get that joke on the way home because Friendly's is a restaurant. You eat food there, you taste it, you know. I thought that was a better joke than it was. Sorry. All right. Scratch that one off the list. So faith, like for me, is just this strong belief in God. Strong belief that there's something more to this reality than what I can see or what is identifiable through microscopes and telescopes. Pope John Paul II said this. He said, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. I did quote the Pope, by the way. I know we're Protestants, we're not allowed to do that, but I did it. Got to give a shout out where it's due. What a beautiful statement, right? This idea that faith and reason are two wings on which our human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth, that to experience truth, to understand truth, to think through truth, we have to bring these together. Now here's the tension, right? That we can actually be blinded by faith, but we can also be blinded by reason. Like we can miss out on a whole lot because we can be so certain, and we can miss out on a whole lot because we can think uncritically about things. And this happens within Christianities. I use that word plural all over the world. So let me share with you, I don't believe that there is a Christianity. My experience tells me that there are multiple Christianities out there. There are multiple movements in Jesus' name. There are multiple expressions of a life of faith. And some Christianities, right, they would say certain things about Jesus while others would say other things. And when a Christianity overemphasizes faith at the expense of reason, I found that people will do unreasonable things in the name of Jesus. Right? I mean, we will go all out in faith. I mean, I've seen people give up their life savings in faith because you just got to sow the seed of faith and life. I've sat with families as a pastor who, when I started at the church I was at in Maine, I got invited by a group of about 20 people that had started coming to this church just before Wendy and I got there. And we sat down and they just began to pour out their heart in the story of what had happened to them at a church they had all come from, where they just basically had been robbed. They just had been robbed. I mean, people, they talked about bringing their jewelry in, bringing in wedding rings, bringing in life savings, and come to find out that the pastor of this church, everything was put into their family's name, the building. There was no real board of directors. And so they come, why? Because they had done unreasonable things in a community that was grounded in faith, and reason was unacceptable. No asking questions, no thinking through. Jesus said, go sell all your possessions, give to the poor, and then come follow after me. So let's do this together. So there's an uncritical spirit there. But here's the thing. When a Christianity overemphasizes reason at the expense of faith, what I found is people will actually act unfaithfully to the message of Jesus. Right? If we just kind of remove it completely and we say, well, I can understand it all. I can have certainty. Now we forsake the message of Jesus and the radical nature of discipleship for what? Cognitive understanding. I memorize all the dogmas, I sign the paper, I go through this class and that class, and then I get baptized, and then I'm in because I have all the right beliefs. Meanwhile, my life doesn't change at all. The world isn't a better place for me being in it. The world might not actually be a worse place, but it's not any better. But I've come to this space. Like I've eliminated all the things that we can't understand. They're just not part of it. And we grab a hold of reason. Both are dangerous. What I've seen, however, in my heritage, and which I think is a part of a lot of our heritage that are sitting in this space, is a Christianity that unwelcomes like reason. Like my background was this faith side of things. And what I've discovered and what I see happening and what I just saw happen in the space that I was doing work at in New England with just this one church that just absolutely imploded, mega church imploded this last week. I mean, in a matter of 3 weeks. Because it was a space that was just about God and faith, and we're going to go take the hill, and personality driven and all this crazy stuff. And what happens in that space where reason is not welcomed, a critical attitude, a critical spirit is not welcomed. And I don't mean critical in a negative way, I mean it in a neutral way, right? To think critically. When that is not welcomed into our expression of faith and in our spiritual lives, what I think happens is that Christianity just becomes a tool. It becomes a tool for somebody or some people to gain power, to maintain control, and impose fear on people. Now, I don't think they sit down in their evil lair and go, let's see, how can we do this? I think that oftentimes these we'll say weeds, grow up in the garden out of very good intention. Because there's a tradition that's handed on to people that's built on faith and built on fear, built on a lack of critical thinking, a lack of reasonability. And so we just kind of inherit what we do. So I'm not scapegoating, saying all the problems in Christianity are in this one segment, but I think this is a part of a lot of our story. As I get to have coffee with those of you that are brave enough to see, is that really his phone number? And then I text back and you're like, whoa, it's voodoo. Like, it's witchcraft. Hear these stories of just pain that flows from this just endless cycle. And so at the heart of this series is something kind of scary. It's this desire to experience and this desire for a healthy expression of Christianity that's informed by both history and theology, that's informed by both faith and reason, and that's informed by what we'll call the historical Jesus and the living Christ. See, the truth is when we gather in spaces like this as followers of Jesus, we're experiencing what we could call the living Christ, this universal reality of God that is coursing through the world. And we're experiencing it through the lens of Jesus. It's part of our tradition. It's part of our heritage. And so this series is really about how do we dig into the life of the historical Jesus, the man that walked on this earth 2,000 years ago, the man that is probably the most influential person in Western history, potentially global history, of which who never wrote a word. Jesus didn't write one word, didn't author one thing. We have nothing that Jesus wrote. The stuff that we have about Jesus, the actual physical texts that we have, that we study, all are hundreds and hundreds of years after the life of Jesus. I mean, they're written, some maybe were written as close to 20 years in the life of Jesus. They come to us from a culture that we know very little about in our Western American world and our values. But that like original Jesus who walked, the one that historians look at and say, okay, we know that there was this guy who grew up in Nazareth. We know that at one point in time he was a disciple of a guy named John the Baptist. Historically, we know that at some point he stopped being a disciple of John the Baptist and kind of took a completely different path than John's message. We know that he had followers. We know that he invited people to be his disciples. We know that he spoke historically about 12 disciples. That was important because there were 12 nations in Israel. We know that he was crucified on a Roman cross, considered an insurrectionist, an enemy of the state. Like historically, that's kind of what we know. And the question becomes like, what is that Jesus like? What did he think about himself? And see, some of you are like, well, don't we have the 4 Gospels? Like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Like, they tell us everything. And that was kind of the predominant thought for many, many years. The church kind of held the power. They said, this is who Jesus was. This is what he was all about. And inside of that emerged a vision and image of Jesus. Right? And that kind of dominant primary image of the person of Jesus, which was accepted in many spaces, and many of us kind of grew up with it, was Jesus was this person who was divine or semi-divine, however you want to parse that one out, but knew exactly who he was. That Jesus knew exactly who he was. He knew that he was sent from God, that he was the Son of God, that he proclaimed that there was salvation through him, that he went about and he proclaimed this about himself, and he called people to repentance, and he knew that his mission was to die for the sins of the world so that the possibility of eternity could open up. Like, that's the dominant picture of Jesus. But here's the thing. Like, as soon as scholars were able to start asking really critical questions of the text, about 200, 250, 300 years ago, people started going, wait a second. Hang on. That image is based on the Gospel of John, where Jesus is going around saying things like, I'm the bread of life. I'm the light of the world. All these I am statements. And then they started to look at like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, comparing them, instead of just reading it vertically, like let's read Matthew and then Mark and then Luke, which your brain kind of puts it all together. They started reading them side by side. And they started going, wait a second, this is kind of crazy. The Jesus in John never talked in parables, but the Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, we're told only taught in parables. What the heck's up with that? And they started, wait a second, like the Jesus of John, like, was confident, like knew everything that was going on. Even in Jesus' arrest, people are bowing down to him. Like, Jesus is being arrested and everybody's bowing down to him. But that's not what's happening in the other Gospels. And they started to look carefully and critically and started really studying these texts, and they realized, wow, we actually have a totally different picture of Jesus. Totally different picture of Jesus. And so scholarship devoid of church control, like no longer fearing being burned at the stake, started to emerge and started to engage in really beautiful work, saying, what was the real Jesus like? Would the real Jesus please stand up? Did Jesus walk around saying things like, I'm the bread of life, take up your cross and follow me? I mean, let's just take that one statement, for example. Take up your cross and follow me. If you're living in the first century, the only time you ever see a cross is when you're walking by people hanging on it, naked, at eye level. So the Roman Empire is telling you, hey, this is what happens when you think you're better than the Roman Empire, when you think you can take us on. Like, when Jesus says that, do you think that would have made any sense to anybody in that moment? They'd have been like, take up your cross. What is he talking about? Now, it makes perfect sense, post-resurrection, experience of the living Christ, when you're trying to redeem and make sense of what happened to Jesus. So this popular image of Jesus kind of begins to erode a couple hundred years ago. And great work starts to get done. And now we get these different pictures of Jesus that come. And what's come out of scholarship is that the Gospels themselves are giving us an image of Jesus that's really read through the lens of the resurrection. That the stories, the traditions, the sayings of Jesus, they all have been colored by the lived experience of the communities that they were coming out of. So John is writing for a community, Matthew's writing for a community, Mark is writing for a community, and they're shaping the inherited stories they have about Jesus. And by the way, like, critical scholarship has abandoned long time ago this idea that these are eyewitness accounts. That's not to say that they're not powerful or filled with truth or they don't go back to eyewitness accounts. It's just to say most scholars just look and say, well, that's probably not what's happening. What we have here are like a tradition that Mark starts with. He's probably the earliest writer. Matthew and Luke have most of Mark in their Gospels. I mean, the exact Greek, we can see it right there. John takes and adapts some of Mark, maybe. There's another tradition about the cross and the resurrection that probably emerged. So they're using sources, putting it all together, and they're shaping and telling the story of Jesus to their audience in a way that makes sense and was meaningful to them. That's why we call it the gospel according to Mark. Like, we have one gospel, but we have 4 according tos in the canon. We actually have a whole lot more according tos that are out there. Now, the important for us in exploring this and trying to dig into this person of Jesus is because if Jesus, and we know historically, called people to follow him, and as we experience God in this world, the living Christ, we'll call it, the resurrected reality of Jesus, if Jesus' ultimate invitation was to follow him, which that seems to be historically something that goes back, Jesus invited people to follow him, you have to say, well, what was he inviting them to? Was he inviting them to understand exactly Savior of the world, sin, sacrifice? Was he inviting them into something else? What does that look like, and where do we look at it? So what we want to do throughout this series is take some of the best scholarship that we have currently on the historical Jesus, get a good picture of what were some key identifiable markers about that Jesus, and say, how can that inform us? And so to kind of do this, let's just run a little experiment, okay? How many of y'all are having fun today? Come on, this is so boring. I know. Like, I totally get it. Some of you are like, why did I come today? Okay, because it's going to get even better right now. Because we're trying to give like 220 years of scholarship on the historical Jesus in about 35 minutes, right? No problem. Now, let's run a little experiment on the historical Jesus, explaining Jesus and experiencing Christ, the living Christ, okay? Faith and reason. And let's do this by asking the question, who is Jesus? Okay? Now, in historical Jesus studies, they have compartmentalized and kind of created an index. There are 522, everybody say 522. 522 what we'll call complexes that involve Jesus that they found in the literature. So there's 522 like sayings that Jesus is said to have said, or experiences that people had with Jesus, or statements about Jesus. There's 522 of those in the history of scholarship in the world that we know of. They're from languages like Coptic, from Greek, Aramaic, right? Now, of those 522 complexes, they pull those from 52 written sources that we found in the dirt, right? 52 sources. How many of y'all know there are not 52 gospels in the Bible? Right? I mean, we may not still memorize the books of the Bible. We might not even know them because we have Google to help us with that now. But let me just rest assured there are not 52 gospels in the New Testament. But gospels aren't the only places where we find things that Jesus said. Some of the letters that Paul wrote, he makes mention, he talks about Jesus, things that Jesus said. Right? And we have extra canonical sources, things that are actually come from earlier than our canonical gospels about the life of Jesus. And there's 52 of those. And all of these works, scholars say, basically span from the year 30, right around when Jesus died, to the year 150, so middle of the 2nd century. So these 52 documents, that's where they come from, that time period. Now, most of them, by the way, the extant copies that are still in existence, they're from much later on. Like, the copies that we have of, the earliest copies that we have of Matthew are from late 2nd century, right? They don't even come close to the originals. We have no originals of any of these things, right? Some of them are reconstructed documents, but they come from this time period, right? So shortly after, and they kind of break this up into 4 categories, like imagine like stratus, like of like sediment, you know? So there's level 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 is the closest to the life of Jesus. Now, one of these complexes is called Who is Jesus? Isn't that funny? Right? So it's the Who is Jesus complex. And that's the story, if you're familiar, where Jesus says to his disciples, hey, what do the people say about me? What's going on out there? What are the people saying? What's on Twitter? How am I trending? Right? That's what Jesus was asking. What's trending about me out there? Okay? So we call this complex in historical Jesus scholarship, Who is Jesus? And here's what we know. It's of the earliest strata, right? So it comes like these sayings that Jesus are said to have said, this story, comes from very early, very, very early. And we have two like completely separate instances of them. Does that make sense? So they're not related. It's not like it's a source, one's a source for the other. Now, the one unique space where this Who is Jesus, what are people saying about me, comes from a place called the Gospel of Thomas, which is a gospel that we found in 1945, and it's written in Syriac. It's written in Coptic. I apologize. And then we have this other time is experienced in the 3 canonical gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And there's a couple other late gospels that it's been adapted into, but they're all part of it. So 6 different places. Now, they're different. Whenever we hear this, they're different. They've been shaped, right? So Mark chapter 8, verse 27 is probably the earliest gospel in the New Testament. Don't you just feel like you're in school right now? Isn't this beautiful? It's going to change your life, all right? We're going to read through these real quickly, okay? Because it's important that we recognize we're not dismissing anything, but we're digging in because our faith should be grounded in this stuff, okay? So here's what Mark says. Here's how Mark uses this complex about Jesus, who's like, what's trending about me? So here's what he says. Now Jesus and his disciples, they set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. So that's important. Remember, Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is north of the Sea of Galilee, about 30 miles, okay? There was a space, pagan worship there. There was a place called the Gates of Hades in Caesarea Philippi, okay? It's important to remember that. Now here's Mark. He says they're going up there, and along the way, like they're walking, eating some figs, whatever, Jesus looks at his disciples and says, who do people say that I am? That's the question. That's Mark, right? Who do people say that I am? They said in reply, well, some people say that you're John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets. Now, it's kind of funny when you think about it. Who do you think that I am? Right? Well, you're John the Baptist. I'm not John the Baptist. I'm wearing camel's clothes and eating locusts. Give me a break. Right? But they say, oh, you're this person or that person. It's a very strange conversation. Can we admit that it's a strange answer? Okay. Now, he asked them, okay, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter responds, you're the Messiah. And then you get this weird statement from Jesus. He warns them, don't tell anybody. Do not put that on Facebook. Right? In the Gospel of Mark, it's called the Messianic secret. Messianic secret. Jesus is always telling people, don't talk about me, right? Don't let anybody know. Jesus himself never says it, by the way, but he's telling people don't say it. Okay, now, so you get Jesus. He says, the question is what? Who do people say that I am? You get, oh, you're John the Baptist, you're Elijah, you're the prophet. Now, Matthew, who we say has the Gospel of Mark, a version of it, uses the story, and he says this. When Jesus went to the region of Caesarea Philippi, bam, boom, right there, exact same Greek phrase. He asked his disciples, no, this is different. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Oh, that's fascinating. So Jesus doesn't ask, who do people say that I am? He says, who's the Son of Man? Now, the Son of Man is an apocalyptic figure from the book of Daniel. Scary stuff. And it actually is really beautiful because there's these empires that rise up and they're like beasts in the book of Daniel. But then there's this empire to come that is supposed to be human, compassionate and gracious and loving. So it's an empire like the Son of Man. There's one ruling like the Son of Man. So it became this apocalyptic phrase. So Jesus isn't really asking about himself. He's saying, well, who do people say the Son of Man is? Well, now the response makes sense. Well, some say it's John the Baptist, others Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Oh, fascinating. And so Jesus then says to him, exact same Greek, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter replies in the Gospel of Matthew, you're the Messiah, and he adds Son of the living God. Now here's where it gets crazy. Matthew goes nuts. Matthew just starts making stuff up. This isn't in Mark. Where's he getting this nonsense from? Now he goes off on Peter. He's like, Peter, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or the netherworld, which happens to be just down the street, maybe an eye shot from the story, will not prevail against it. This truth. And I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. I mean, Jesus is like into Peter. It's like, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then he strictly ordered the disciples, don't tell anybody who the Messiah is. A little different, right? Community of Matthew, by the way, really into Peter, not so much Paul. Right? There's a little bit of dissent and discord as the church developed in the first century. Who was actually in charge? Like, who was the guy? Who was the pope? So you had a faction that was like totally into Paul, and you had one that was into Peter. The Matthian community, by the way, thumbs up on Peter for sure, because they were a Jewish community. All right? Now, very different. Now, let's go to Luke. Are you having fun yet? Come on now. Buckle the seatbelts. Here we go. All right. Luke chapter 9. Same thing. Now, Caesarea Philippi, not even in the question. It just says, once when Jesus was praying in solitude. Right? Now, again, Luke is using Mark. We agree on that. Every scholar says, yeah, he's using this. Once when Jesus was praying in solitude, he asked the disciples who were with him, which how can you be in solitude and have the disciples with you? First of all, I have a problem with that, Luke. It doesn't make any sense, but okay. He says, who do the crowds say that I am? All right, so it's a little different. Who do the crowds say that I am? And then they reply, John the Baptist, Elijah, and others, one of the ancient prophets that has arisen. Now, here's what's interesting. In Luke, a little bit earlier on, we find out that Herod has gone after John the Baptist. And he knew that John the Baptist was dead. He had him killed. And then the word about Jesus gets to him. And Herod is they're asking him, who do you think this Jesus is? It's well, maybe it's John the Baptist resurrected. That's what Herod says in the story. Or Herod says, well, maybe it's John the Baptist, or maybe it's one of the prophets, or maybe it's Elijah. This is Herod, the Roman puppet king, right? And then you have the disciples say, well, this is what people are saying about you. And then Jesus says, but who do you say that I am? Now Peter says, you're the Messiah of God. Notice Luke doesn't worry about Son of God, Son of living God. That's not Luke language, that's Matthew. He says, you're the Messiah of God. And then Jesus rebuked him for getting the question right. How dare you? No, he rebukes him and he says, don't tell anybody. Now, interestingly enough, the don't tell anybody stuff is really, Mark is what it's all about. You don't really see that in Matthew and Luke, but because Matthew and Luke are using Mark, they're we should probably keep that in there. Now, here's when it gets really fun. Let's take a little journey outside the Bible. Are you with me? Put your thumb up. We're going to hitchhike back a few years to the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is a collection of sayings by Jesus. It's a totally different type of gospel. There's no narrative. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's what's called a Gnostic gospel. It came out of a Gnostic tradition that was being developed really early within Judaism in the first century. Gospel of Thomas. Gospel of Thomas 13, probably the oldest version of this little saying where Jesus is what do people say about me? So here's what the Gospel of Thomas says. Now, don't freak out. I'm not saying that the Gospel of Thomas should be in the Bible, okay? But this is beautiful literature that this is the way certain people follow Jesus as one of the earliest communities out there. And this is what it says. You're going to love this. How many have ever read the Gospel of Thomas? Raise your hand up nice and high. Any geeks in the room with me? Thank you. I see that hand. That's good. That's a flashback to the old days when you'd have people raise their hand to pray the prayer and get out of hell. So, okay. Then we're going to go right to the Gospel of Thomas, and I'm going to lose my job tomorrow. Okay, here we go. Gospel of Thomas, the 13th saying, right? This is what it says. Jesus says to his disciples, compare me to someone and tell me who I am like. That's like Jesus having a bad day, right? Just tell me what I'm like, everybody. Come on. I'm having a bad day. I tried to turn water into wine. It didn't work out. It was really bad wine. Help me out here, right? No, he says, you tell me who I'm like. And so Simon Peter doesn't get it right, by the way. Well, he does, but he says, you're like a righteous angel. Oh, fascinating, Peter. Then Matthew says to him, you're like a wise philosopher. Oh, I could see that. Okay, good. Thomas, namesake for the gospel, Thomas says to him, Master. Thomas was a kiss-up, all right? He says, Master, my mouth is wholly incapable of saying whom you are like. And then Jesus says, I'm not your master. Because you have drunk, you have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring which I have measured out. The disciples, you could just picture the disciples like, this guy again, oh my gosh. I don't know, I can't describe him. It's a simple question, Thomas, which just means twin, by the way. That's not even his real name. It's like twin. That's what it is, English, like twin. It's like, come on, oh my gosh. And then it says that Jesus took Thomas and withdrew and told him three things. He was like, come on, you're my favorite, Thomas. I'm going to reveal to you the hidden truths. That's what Gnostic reality was about. So when Thomas comes back to his companions, the disciples, they're all like, what did he say? What did he say? What did he say? What did he say? And Thomas, making friends, says, if I tell you one of the things that he told me, you'd pick up stones and throw them at me. That's not a good feeling, right? What could he have possibly said to you? He says, a fire will come out of those stones and then burn you up. And it ends. That's how the story ends right there. Boom. Done. So let me ask this question. What did Jesus really say? You're like, who cares? Can we please go to lunch already? I got to speed this up. Here's the thing. Now we talk about explaining Jesus and experiencing Christ. So the historical question is, how probable is it that Jesus, the historical Jesus, the original Jesus, had a conversation with his disciples about his identity? How probable is it? If it's highly probable, then we would say Jesus actually had some sort of conversation like this. This is a question of historical factuality, not truth. I love the line in the original Indiana Jones, which, by the way, so psyched that another one's coming out this year. The first Indiana Jones, it opens up, it's beautiful, like somebody comes in and he's talking about his archaeology class, and he says what? He says, here we deal with facts. If you're interested in truth, philosophy's down the hallway, right? Historical facts are different than truth. Let's just hold on to that, right? And so historians look at this, and they have all kinds of criteria, and basically, spoiler alert, every scholar looks at this that's participated and says, probably not original Jesus material. Now, does that mean it's not truthful? No. Does that mean it's not filled with wisdom? No. It just goes, well, probably doesn't date back to the historical Jesus. Why is that? Well, they say the historical Jesus, based on the evidence, have really never talked about himself in the first person. That wasn't Jesus to go around saying, well, I'm just wondering. And Jesus, the historical Jesus didn't really initiate those kinds of dialogues. He was always more, the historical Jesus was more in response, right? And when you look at this, if you're going to remember the life of somebody in that time period, you typically would write down sayings that they thought were profound, that pointed you back to the person of Jesus. This story is really about the disciples and their response. It's memorable. And so scholars look and say, hey, here's the scoop. Like, this is the memory of the church in this story talking about, an affirmation of who Jesus was for them. Right? Because in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus never says that he's the Messiah. Never once. In fact, in the three, what we call the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that's just not Jesus' language. He doesn't go around saying, hey, I'm the Messiah. I'm a big deal. Come on. Johnny's like, I am the bread of life. But the historical original Jesus, he didn't really do that. That wasn't his jam. Now, what happens is you say, okay, well, that's fine, because it became super important to the early followers of Jesus in Jewish communities that they embraced Jesus as the Messiah because they had walked away from their mainstream faith. And so these communities developed, and they took their tradition and they said, no, what we're saying is this is the Messiah. Even though Jesus never said it of himself, fascinatingly enough, they kind of knew it. They said, this is it. And Peter got it, and that's why Peter's in charge. Or if you're the Gospel of Thomas, Thomas got it. That's why we're Gnostics. But the historical Jesus probably didn't do it. He probably wasn't worried about that concept. So that's the question of historicity. It's not a question of truth. It's not a question of whether Jesus was the Messiah, because the truth is Jesus was the Messiah for these communities. Hands down, they had given up everything to follow him. They had had a real experience with a risen Jesus, and Jesus was their Messiah, and they said, no longer are we following Moses, but we're following Jesus. That's who Jesus is, and if you're a part of this community and you're reading our documents, that's what we're saying. So remember, the question of historicity isn't a question of truth, it's a question of what really do we have? What are these texts? Now, the experiencing Christ question is this: who do you say that Jesus is? Right now, in the personhood of who you are, in your experiences, and the things that you're going through, the fears that you have, the persecutions that you're facing, the things that you've walked away from, the ideas of God that you have been handed, your own hopes for the future. These were all things that these communities were dealing with. Now, the question of the experience with Christ, the universal Christ, the living Spirit of God, is, well, who is Jesus to you in all of that? In all of that, in the midst of your fears, who is Jesus? Because that is a matter of experience with the living Spirit of Jesus. That is a matter of faith. Now, I can hold those two together. Perfectly wonderful. Boy, we are going to be here a long time today, aren't we? Wow. You all should have told me it was 11:15. Okay, here we go. We're into this. Are you with me? Now, it's a question of wisdom and faith, not rules and certainty, not what actually happened or didn't happen. It's about truth and how that truth holds us together. So for these communities, Jesus was for them. Jesus was a Jew. He was speaking to them, and they had embraced him as Messiah. And they had embraced him as the one who fulfilled all this other stuff. So they don't need to do the temple sacrifice thing anymore. And so some people in early Christianity said, well, Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. That's why we don't do sacrifice anymore. Does that mean we as a culture that don't do sacrifices should identify Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice? I don't think so, because that doesn't make any sense to us. But what we're called to do is apply and understand and say, what is the freedom that Jesus offered these early communities in the confessional statement, Jesus is the Messiah, the Lamb of God, the one who takes away the sins of the world. What does that mean for me now? What does it provide me freedom from that brings me into a space of pain or hurt or disillusionment with God? If Jesus is what we say, this full expression of God. That's the living experience. That's what we're asking right now. And so for those who have an experience with the risen Christ, the joy and the hope and the love of God, we're faced with that question today. Who is Jesus? And can I just tell you something right now? It's fun to explore whether or not Jesus actually said it, but my faith does not hinge on whether he said it or not. But my faith is actually enlivened by the complexity of the whole thing and just giving freedom to let the text be the text. Every generation faces this question. Every generation is faced with taking the gospel, the freedom that's found in Jesus, that the original hearers heard, that the Jews of first century found freedom from oppressive religion, from exclusive religion. They found freedom. They said, we're going to embrace this, right? And then they adopted and adapted and told that story in a way that would make sense and bring freedom to their community. And so the historical study of the text of the New Testament and those outside the New Testament, it reveals that the earliest followers of Jesus, they were handed stories and sayings about Jesus. And they developed them. And they manipulated them, not in a way to deceive people, but in a way to free people. And sometimes they even created stories to help people understand. And don't get mad about that, because Jesus created stories all the time to help people understand. They picked up that bad habit from Jesus. How dare you tell a parable about me, right? So when people want to reject Scripture because they say, well, people can't walk on water. I'm like, fine, people can't walk on water. What's the story mean? Fine, people can't calm the wind with their voices. Okay, I get that. We can't historically prove that. But what is it saying? It's saying that the risen Christ is in control of the seas and the storms. And you better get him in your boat. And yeah, we could talk about it, and we don't have to have this faith that's grounded in dogma all the time. We can actually have vibrant faith that's living and in constant dialectical exchange with historicity. And when we find new documents, we can explore what they mean for us and for our faith. And I believe that that's part of the process of inspiration. I believe that's part of God breathing into history in a partnership. The God of the New Testament and of the Hebrew Bibles is not a God of control, right? We see that. He's perfectly content. She is perfectly content. They are perfectly, whatever pronoun we want to use with God, perfectly content to let us screw things up. But partners with us always. That's the inspiration. So to say that those seeking to live a faithful life to the teachings of Jesus 70 or 80 or even 100 years after Jesus, that they shaped their memories and they potentially created some of these stories to tell their truth, it's not scary to me. It was at one point in time, but it's beautiful and it's consistent with the picture of God that's not in control of every little thing that we do, that doesn't want that, but it's a God that works with human limitations and with human imagination. One scholar I love, he wrote this. He says, I'll talk about original, developmental, and compositional layers, or of retention, development, and creation within the text. He says, I'll talk about these three layers that we're pulling out and we're finding in this really beautiful, in these documents. Like what's original, what is a development, and what has been composed by the authors to bring about a greater truth. He says, but I reject absolutely any pejorative language for those latter processes. I don't think that if someone is adapting it or creating it, it makes it any less powerful or should be seen negatively. And then he says this, and I love it. And with this, we're going to end. He says, Jesus left behind him thinkers, not memorizers. Disciples, not reciters. People, not parrots. And see, the church has done the opposite. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't say that out loud. See, I think religion is probably a better way to do that. Religion, church, does the opposite. We create memorizers, not thinkers. Reciters, not disciples. Parrots, not people. And so my desire as a faith leader in the 21st century is to reform that, is to be in a space of community that says, wait a second, let's be thinkers, not memorizers. Let's be disciples, not reciters. Let's be people, not parrots. So we're going to close out. I know there's all kinds of blanks left unfilled. Hang in there. I knew I was never going to get through all that nonsense, all right? But that's what we're going to do. We're going to get a good picture of the Jesus that walked around with dust in his sandals, that had to go behind the bush to go to the bathroom like everybody else, who wasn't sure about his own identity. I believe that deeply. You cannot be fully human and know everything about your own personhood. I mean, the church says it's a complete heresy to say that he was fully God and not fully human. So there's this balance. This Jesus who found his identity, who went down one path with John the Baptist and said, whoop, time out. Whoa, problem, he just got killed. This doesn't seem to be the great path. I don't think that's it. And then it gets interpreted well, that Jesus actually came and said, yeah, this path, now something new is happening. So we're going to look at that Jesus in a few key ways and see what that Jesus invites us into when it comes to our experience with the living Christ. Just a moment, we're going to receive the Connect cards, the offering. As we do that, Mickey has a great song that he's going to play for us. And as late as we are, I just don't want to get rid of this song because it's a beautiful song. I heard this song for the first time probably 2 years ago. Just tears in my eyes. Every time I hear it, I listened to it this morning as I was getting ready, knowing that you were going to get to hear this song, some of you for the first time. Because this song, in just beautiful poetry and in beautiful art, conveys why this is so important and what happens when we don't explain Jesus well. And that doesn't mean that we don't have well meaning behind our lack of explanation. But there's a lot at stake here, and so I want to just encourage you to hang in there. Hang in there with me. Hang in there with our communicators who are going to be exploring these topics together. And we come from a space of humility that says, this is a great mystery. We don't have to abandon reason. We don't have to have it all together. We can give our best idea of the historical Jesus now, and then that can change with new findings and new thoughts. And we can experience this living Christ all the while through it. So take a listen to this song. Finish filling out that Connect card, and I'll be back with our blessing here in just a moment to get you out for dinner tonight. All right?